thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Rollwise podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mike, and I'm here with my connoisseur of Cyberpunk, Brent. Say hi, Brent.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. And this week, we wanted to kind of jump into some news, say hello to everybody, and kind of do a little bit of a news roundup. Even though we're not a news show, there is some crazy stuff that has been happening, and keeping up to date is almost impossible, especially in just the wide world of video games, tabletop games, etc., etc. And then we thought we'd start dabbling in a little bit of the punk genres. Something punk sounded a lot of fun, so that's what we're going to hop into. Obviously, we missed the wave that Edge Runners brought with Cyberpunk 2077, but you know what? Better late than never.
I feel like that's going to be the consistency of our episodes. Is we'll be slightly behind the curve, and that'll always be okay.
We're so fashionably late. We show up the next day to the party. That's
exactly.
that's
you mean
really
everybody's gone?
They're like, who the fuck are you?
I don't think you were invited.
Yeah, we were invited.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, we were never invited to the party. We just heard about it from people, so we just wanted.
We're so cool. We just showed up. Yeah. You're welcome.
So that's us jumping onto the bandwagon of Cyberpunk 2020 when everybody else has already done their thing.
They've already made all their characters in D&D about it. That's for sure.
They have. They made their characters in D&D. They've talked about it. The content train has already left the station, and we're two rambling men just chasing after the train or something. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, so starting with news. So Brent, you'd mentioned that you played the 2016 Doom, but you didn't play Doom Eternal. So this almost hits close to you, but you know me, I can't play first person shooters because my brain is broken, and every time I try to play that kind of game, I get sick, which is why
there's something about vomit that is not cohesive to the gaming experience.
It's just feeling nauseous for the most of the time you're playing a game isn't fun. And maybe there's a third person view in that. I don't know if there is, but I thought it was mostly first person. That's kind of
it's all first person shooter.
Yeah. So
fast first person shooter. So if you get sick from first person shooters, I could see Doom making you sick.
Well, it does. And because I remember playing like old school Doom and Wolfenstein 3D or whatever that they were back on the day when they were just shit pixels on there, and you were just like, oh my god, this is the most amazing computer game, because that was really the only game out there.
Doom was the first computer game I ever played, and I do remember that it was amazing back then.
Oh yeah,
it was awe-inspiring.
I want to know. I kind of want to know what I played, because we lived in kind of an apartment complex next to the college campus there, and mysterious town where you live that should not be named. But we had this one guy who was a friend, like my friend's dad had a computer, and he could run programs, and I swear it was like all those old like Atari style games. Those were my first games. But then my uncle in another town in Montana, he had Doom for some reason. I don't know why he had Doom, but that's when I first started playing it.
Because it was free
as shit.
My first game was Mario Brothers. Like I played Mario. I got a Nintendo when I was pretty young, and like I played Mario Brothers an insane amount. But gaming kind of grew from there, and then in middle school, I think my friend's older brother had a computer, and like he was playing Doom, and I was like, oh my god, that's amazing.
Well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with just fucking going around killing demons, and of course this is the silent protagonist at its best, right?
Oh yeah. Well, he had the little face that like grimaced when you got shot and stuff. That was pretty interesting.
He did, and eventually he just passed out and died.
Yeah. But anyways, your news about Doom, since we went on a far tangent about being old there for a second. So,
do you remember back in the day?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll bring this back into line about your Doom Eternal news.
Oh Jesus! So and I'm not really like the guy that goes into all the drama on this stuff, but this is just absolutely bonkers. The first thing is that so the 2016 version of Doom, I guess, was very well received, and the music was really, really well received. And it was composed by a guy named Mick Gordon. And so, id Software said, "Hey, Mick, why don't you come back and help us do this new Doom Eternal, do the sound for it?" And kind of, I think, and I think people really misjudge how important sound is. So, having not played the game, anything I say is obviously speculation, but there are so many things that sound does for me when I'm playing video games. Like a really good soundtrack with a video game stays with me forever. Like even if the game sucks, but like I remember just like playing like Chrono Cross.
Oh
You play
no.
like
I'm pretty sure if anybody played like the original Doom, like you can hear that first level music like in your head right now. I know I
yeah.
can.
Well, exactly. So like, so music to me is one of those like probably undervalued parts of the experience. And I think that it's interesting that, when you look at this entire story, you go, the one guy they fucked was the guy who was the music guy.
Right.
So how this kind of turns out and why this is such a huge story is that like this Mick Gordon, he was brought on to do all this work, and everything was all set up, and he was apparently working behind the scenes, and eventually they decided they were going to release this collector's edition, and they were going to say like, this Doom collector's edition includes an OST that is made by Mick Gordon, this really, really cool dude. But like, apparently nobody had told Mick Gordon that he was making this OST. He didn't have a contract for it. He didn't have like he didn't even know it was happening until he watched like E3. And I mean, the production for Doom Eternal was already a shit show, according to this thing, because he basically posted an open letter response to this guy named like Marty Stratton, and Marty Stratton basically lambasted Mick Gordon, saying he's the reason like all the music and all this controversy about how much the music sucks. And 2 years later, like this is literally 2 years later, Mick Gordon writes this thing that's probably been heavily reviewed by lawyers because it has lawyer speak. And anybody who wants to read it, you can go to Medium and see this pretty lengthy piece on Mick Gordon showing the receipts on how much of a shit show this entire production was. And then the worst part is, I guess what they do is they basically pay you for the minutes. So like a project person on the game says, we're going to use 142 minutes, but we're not going to pay you for minutes that for stuff we don't use. Well, I guess, according to Mick, he alleges that they used everything he submitted to them, basically with like 280 minutes of total music, and they only paid him for half. So great. And then to top that off, so I guess the total minutes released, they had 4 hours and 46 minutes, and the contracted minutes he was paid for was 2 hours and 22 minutes. And then to top that off, throughout the entire process, he wasn't really getting paid. So there were like an 11-month stint where he was just not getting paid for the stuff he was producing. And then it also alleges that he did contact Bethesda, the owner of id, and worked out a deal with them to get the OST going, and he basically produced the OST, and then they kind of like put a kibosh on it, and then they just took a bunch of tracks from the game and just threw it on a CD with this other dude who then co-opted credit even though he didn't write it or do any of this stuff. It was just, I mean, like if you read this, you just go, holy fuck, like this is just an absolute shit show. If any of this is true, or if this is true, but I mean, like I said, he has receipts, he has emails, he has contract dates, he has stuff that shows that he has a fairly a fairly good legal case should this ever go to court. I don't actually know what he's asking for at this point. I mean, they I guess the guy Marty, he released this open letter on Reddit and basically shit all over this Mick guy, and I guess a lot of the fans then taking that kind of as gospel also shit on this Mick guy. So I'm sure he got toxic fandoms, I'm sure, are great to deal with on any level.
Yeah.
And so I mean, this guy probably received a lot of hate and unwarranted apparently, but yeah, so this big old thing just came rearing its ugly head again just yesterday because this Medium article. So I mean, I think that it just shows that id Software was run like an absolute clown show if this is how that game came out, and I really don't feel like playing anything from it if this is the kind of business that they run.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like they took advantage of a situation that they had no right to take advantage of, and that's unfortunate.
It is. I mean, how fucking
Business
crazy is that?
business is sometimes not the not wholesome, shall we say? Let's say that it's not always
Yeah.
wholesome to its employees. So that's unfortunate, especially for something good like Doom.
Yeah, and apparently the game was fairly well received for other reasons. And I mean, I'm sure that he did music that was good for the game, but I guess the production part of it, they were asking him to make music for levels and stuff that hadn't been even conceptualized yet. So they're like, we need the final level music. Well, what's the level like? We haven't figured that out yet.
We don't know yet. Make sounds, monkey.
Yeah, basically, that was it kind of seemed like that's how that production went. And he,
Bang,
as a
bang,
professional,
bang your cymbals together, monkey, and make noises. That's all that matters.
yeah. So, I mean, it's a really interesting read. Like, I hadn't expected to read the entire thing, but as soon as I started just reading it, I mean, I felt like I was sucked into this just warped, twisted, like, holy fuck. Like, I hope I never in that position. Like, I don't even want that to be like just his side of the story kind of bad. Like, I just get away from that entire thing with a 10-foot pole kind of thing. It was bad.
Right.
So yeah, that was quite the read that kept me up later last night than I expected. I'm not gonna lie.
That'll happen. You get down those rabbit holes.
Yeah. So, but otherwise, in much better news, so you heard that ESPN is now a D&D network, right?
From you, yeah, you educated me that apparently ESPN has some D&D ties now.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of not thought that, I guess just with my small brain, I'd never really envisioned D&D on ESPN in any capacity. But you know what? I'm happy. Honestly, the more that gets out there, the cooler the hobby is, and it just kind of brings more players to the table because, people that had maybe different perceptions of D&D now seeing these huge football players sitting around a table, calling themselves the heathens. You got a barbarian and some damp here, like, and these guys are like, I mean, it's funny because these dudes are like huge football playing types, and they have the coolest figures and everything like that. Because I'm sure they got like NFL money to
Exactly.
put towards this hobby. But yeah, the guys looked like I had a pretty solid campaign. They were enjoying the shit out of it. I mean, it's only 4 minutes, obviously, on ESPN, but for D&D to even get 4 minutes on ESPN is pretty fucking crazy.
Well, yeah, and it crosses that, tenuous jock nerd line that always is a thing, it seems.
Well, it always was a thing. I mean, maybe we get to put it in the past tense now,
Maybe.
Maybe. Apparently the Johnny or the Stanton guy, I don't know football players, but Johnny Stanton, I think his name is. He's the guy who runs the D&D game. Apparently he came out to like a major event with a Critical Role t-shirt on. And I'm sure like
there you go. Critical Role, greasing the wheels for D&D in all ways.
oh yeah, I can only imagine, I mean, if you're going to get out there and you get people in in the NFL.
Well, there's some pretty big actors that do a lot of D&D content we kind of talked about before, like what is his name? The guy that makes the guy that makes the Death Save shirts.
Death Save shirts.
Yeah.
Bad with names. There's that that guy that I cannot pronounce his name because it's like Joe Magliano.
That's him. He has his D&D influenced clothing line called Death Saves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's him. That's the guy.
Well, and I apologize to Joe because obviously I don't know how to say his last name, but it's like something close to what I said. But obviously,
Magliano? Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that was exactly who I was thinking of. Like, a lot of actors have definitely taken an interest in D&D. So yeah, it's always good to see new venues and people showing it off. So that's good.
Yeah, it's good, and I mean, I just like seeing it because it's like, I mean, you're like, I don't care if they're playing D&D, I just like the fact that they're playing tabletop, right? And I mean, it's like Stranger Things was the cool thing that kind of really turned a lot of heads in that direction. And I mean, I told you there's an interactive D&D inspired theater that's happening where the audience is, the fourth player. And I mean, have you ever been to an interactive theater it like kind of event or anything like that?
I have not.
Well, I have,
I know
and
people who have,
well, I'm
but
one
I
of
have
them.
not.
So, and I think they're interesting, right? Like we went to one of those murder mystery dinner type things, right? Where
Mhm.
there's kind of like a crowd of people. There's a bunch of actors. It was set in like Prohibition.
Now,
Um,
I have a question.
sure.
So I heard there's two types. Is this the type where like the people are sitting at the table with you, like the actors, or is this the type where there's a stage?
This is the type where there was a stage.
Okay.
However, audience could participate, and I was brought up to the out of the 50 people in the audience. I was one of the unlucky assholes that was brought up to the stage to be like, okay, now do your best dance. I'm sitting there like, fucking don't dance. Like, okay, well, I'm trying to shake my booty, and I am just not that guy. Um, gotta laugh, and I run away and embarrassing. But that's okay. But this D&D interactive show, I guess, it's called what the fuck was it called? It was called the 20-sided tavern. um, they don't have to bring you up if you don't want to participate in that way. You don't have to, but I guess there's both kinds of participation. So those people that kind of want that experience, I guess, can get it to a degree, and then there's
Yeah.
also an app that they use so that the audience kind of like guides the show. And I know you mentioned something about the Vegas one, and I mean and if that's one still going, I'd go to Vegas and see you. I'm sure my wife would just love it. I'd be like, peace, take care of the baby.
Yeah, Questworld is the name of the show in Vegas, and I don't know if it's still on or not because the last time I planned, the last time I traveled or planned to travel was pre-COVID in 2019, and
Mhm.
I was gonna go to Vegas that year, and then didn't, and I was gonna try and see Questworld then, but I don't know if they've had it since, I don't know if they've had it uh, since the pandemic, so I might have to look around and see. And I don't see anything mentioning any of their shows on their website. But yeah, Questworld was the first one that I heard of kind of a D&D, like a D&D influenced um one interactive show. Yeah, and it's definitely the type of show where they have a stage and then they interact with the audience there. Because I know there's some performance like my parents went to an interactive show called Tony and Tina's Wedding, and like you
Mhm.
sit at the tables and are part of the family.
Oh, okay.
And that's like the interactive show that they went to where like they were
They were the show.
in the show. Um, so it's interesting. And and Questworld's the same way. Like they throw a 20-sided dice out into the audience and stuff like that and have the audience make decisions. I've also seen some of that happen in Zombie Orpheus, which did they're kind of the production company that did like Darkness Rising and that stuff.
Oh, okay.
They usually have a live show at like Gen Con that has some audience participation in it too.
Hmm.
Like they have a big dice that they roll, and they sometimes bring people up on the audience to do different things. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It seems, I don't know, it would be fun. I'm fairly introverted, so it might also be terrifying, but it does seem like it might be fun as well.
Well, I think the part about it is that since you're with like-minded people that are all like kind of D&D esque. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like everybody kind of knows where
You
you're
expect
coming
everyone
from.
to be nerds, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
You're not. I doubt you'd be in the one show that had all of the actors
The-
and actresses that are doing D&D as kind of their hobby, and then like they go join and like, ooh, who's this guy? Why didn't they get one of the quote unquote beautiful people in there? Like,
Well, thank you for letting everybody know I'm not a beautiful person. I will slink
oh,
off with my hunchback after the after this episode is over. I'll remember to climb up into my bell tower.
uh, well, that may not have come out the way I had intended it. I just meant you were one of the average people, not the. Is there a shovel nearby? I could stand to dig myself a few more feet into
Thanks,
this
Brent,
hole.
you subhuman basement dweller.
Well, okay. I think we've beaten that dead horse. Okay. So yeah. Well, I mean,
So
it's good.
so my contribution to the news Changing the subject away from inflammatory remarks about my person. We Six More Vodka, the company that produces Genesis,
Hmm.
announced that they have a special announcement on the 25th.
Okay.
My current prediction is that they are going to release. They're probably going to do another limited run of books. Um, and one of the reasons that I think this is probably the case is I recently tried to pick up the books directly from Six More Vodka and contacted their customer service. Which time the customer service said that they stopped producing physical books in February of 2022, so I missed it by just a couple months. But she said that to keep an eye out because they would be having an announcement. So that kind of leads me to believe that they're going to be doing maybe a limited run or a special printing or something of some of their source books. So if you know about Genesis, we'll probably talk about it someday. It's a pretty fascinating game and beautiful artwork.
Yeah.
If you're interested in getting any of those hard copy books, I think they're going to be available on the 25th, probably for a limited amount of time. And then, just so you know, if you're into Genesis, the all of the books are currently free on the Genesis website. So
PDFs versions.
yeah,
Yeah.
PDF versions. I mean,
And
yeah, you're right. For download, yeah.
and for those people that have never heard of it, I mean, I can only say that this is some high quality production on those books. Like they have got fantastic artwork. I haven't read but a line or two inside the books, but as you browse through the artwork, which to me is a fairly important part of the overall package,
The
it was
game's very
beautiful.
interesting. The game is a very interesting post-apocalyptic setting as well. They don't call it post-apocalyptic; they call it
Primal punk.
well, they call it Primal Punk. That's the name of the core book, but really, what they call it is just apocalyptic because it's actually kind of happening as you're playing,
Mm.
like in
Oh,
the
okay.
world. It's not post. It's not after. It's like during. um,
Apocalypse,
yeah,
like
it's just apocalyptic. Yeah, kind of.
in
Not.
situ, like.
Yeah, yeah. They said that that's one of the reasons why it's interesting is because it's like no, the world is dying in the game. Not it's not dead, and people are trying to survive in a dead world. It's still having
It's on
going
its way
into it.
out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
fascinating game. Very, very interesting game. I've enjoyed reading parts about it so far. So
it is on my I picked it up because got the downloads and I do want to read it. I have like such a long list of things I've been reading that it is blowing my mind. Because now that I'm focused more on this, I've actually been reading a lot more books, game books, and all that stuff. And um, two updates. First is that we have Free League watch. I did get my Free League stuff, so anybody that comes back to this episode wondering if Free League ever got me my bundle of role playing goodies, the good news is I did. Second, speaking of things that are released, Free League also is doing they're doing a Kickstarter of a game called Dragon something. What was it called? Dragon Bane. That's it. They're doing a Kickstarter for a Swedish game. It's called Dragon Bane in English, and it looks pretty cool. Like it definitely is an old school game. It was originally printed in like 1982, so this is like the 40th anniversary of kind of a reprinting from that. But I was kind of on the fence of whether I should do it, but then there was one image, and I shared that image with you, Brent. But basically, it's like Darkwing Duck the Rogue, so I had to go do that.
indeed, it is like Darkwing Duck the Rogue.
Yeah.
That is
So
that is a good way to put that.
yeah, so it's Darkwing Duck the Rogue. How could I resist? And I mean, because it's in Krona again, it's a steal for those people paying in US. It's like $70 for the bundle plus all the unlock goodies. And so I said, what the hell? Might as well do it. Um, and so yeah, so that's good. And then of course, for those people that are following along, we did do our Vason session 0 last week. So we're actually going to have our first session next week where we begin our first mystery. So I cannot wait to provide updates on that.
It should be good.
Yeah, Brent
Uh,
is. What is your character again? A vagabond? You said.
I am playing the vagabond, the homeless kid. Indeed.
Yeah. So
Uh, it should be interesting. The character classes seem interesting. The archetypes seem interesting. Um, it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, we have kind of I mean, I didn't really know what kind of group would be forming as part of the whole session zero and everything like that, but I think we have a lot of the different areas that are being focused on. We have like a hunter, priest, vagabonds, writer. Like we kind of hit
Two
a
hunters, I think. I think we have two hunters, a vagabond, a priest, and the writer. I think
yeah.
that's everybody.
Yeah, so I think that's gonna be really good. I'm trying to figure out how this will all fit into the mystery and all that stuff, but I'm kind of excited. I think it's gonna be a little bit of a different take on a horror mystery.
I think it'll
Hopefully
be good.
lighthearted. Hopefully lighthearted.
On my product watch, I got my copies of Cult Divinity Lost, my hard copies,
Nice.
which are lovely books, and I think my copy of Morkborg and Cyborg will be here soon, also from Free League. But they seem to like me better and tell me how to track my stuff. So I think they're going to be here shortly. So as far as the Kickstarters that I'm currently supporting, sure, I keep getting updates on them, but most of them are pre-COVID. So we'll see when I actually have book in hand for most of those. So
Right on. Right on. So yeah, so I guess that's just general updates. Obviously, that's a lot of updates and not talking about punk. And so for those people that are good and want to just continue their drive, I guess thank you so much for listening so far. And those of you that want to stick around a little bit longer, we're going to actually dive into something more game related, like specific game. Well, not necessarily game related, but specific to a type of genre for games and stuff like that.
game genre, literary genre, sometimes movie genre.
Yeah,
Uh,
all the
Slightly
above.
confusing sometimes.
Oh my gosh, like
Genre.
horribly confusing. Because and I don't know why it became one of those things. Because Brent knows me as a guy who likes things like very well defined, right? Like, so if I definitely like it when there's like this is what it means, this is what it is. A, B, everything has a nice, neat little place. I can definitely get out of my box and all those kind of things. But I think there are some things that it's nice when there's like a universal definition. So that's why we're going to talk about punk stuff because punk is kind of an interesting concept when it comes to a genre. Whatever punk, steampunk, cyberpunk, whatever you want to attach to it, and all that kind of stuff. Because the punk genre for music is very like you get it, right? Like punk like there's no question in anybody's mind like what a punk album is.
There actually
It,
are subgenres of punk though.
there are.
With just not as many.
Mhm.
But again, I think like a lot of that is probably I think pop punk is a good example. Like pretty much everything that came out like late 90s and early 2000s was
Mhm.
called pop punk.
Oh, really?
Um yeah, pretty much and part of that is like that's what people were listening to, so like a lot of bands
Yeah.
kind of gravitated toward that, but also like marketing means that you kind of attach a label that's going to get you
Hmm.
somewhere. It's going to get you in the door. So,
Exactly.
but we'll get
So
into that a little bit more later.
yeah, so I think that punk. I mean, for music at least, I always felt I had a stronger identity as to what what punk meant, at least at the genesis of what it was doing. And I mean, I listened to a little bit of punk in my life, and I remember growing up in a small town and having a bunch of like rebellious youth, teenagers and stuff like that who were trying to define themselves. And I don't know, maybe they were probably more into it. I was definitely more of a wallflower, but you'd go to these concerts that were like set up, impromptu under a bridge, like just it definitely felt like, they were trying to get in the scene, but it wasn't a ton of people there. But it was fun, like growing up and being there and but then you kind of get into the literary stuff and it gets really crazy because I think when you think about punk, you think, well, you think about the kind of fringes of society, anti-establishment, all that kind of stuff, hard edges, all that.
Yeah,
But
and
then you,
cyberpunk very much speaks to that rebellious sort of rebellion fashion.
mhm,
Like cyberpunk specifically very much speaks to that. Like that is a kind of a core concept in that's the punk part of cyberpunk is the idea that there are, these people that are rebellious. They are
Hmm.
not, not not corporations. They're the up and coming or younger generation, rebellious. Like that's a very cyberpunk thing.
Yeah, and so I think with punk being this kind of weird thing that is, in my opinion, turned more marketing, and at least from a speculative fiction and gaming perspective, I think it is kind of neat to jump into cyberpunk and kind of probe that a little bit, because out of all of the different punk genres, that one seems to be the most sensical, even though there's a lot of nonsense around it. And I hope that people, don't hate me for some of my takes, but I may not necessarily agree with everybody on what cyberpunk, what is considered cyberpunk at the end of the day. But I know, Brent, you have a favorite author that is the godfather of cyberpunk.
Well, yeah, I mean, William Gibson is pretty much considered one of the forerunners of cyberpunk. I don't know if they consider him the father of. I think cyberpunk as a genre, as we know it, is definitely birthed from his writing.
Hmm.
Other writers have had before him definitely had influence, like Philip K. Dick,
Yep.
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that sort of thing. But I think it really congealed strongly when Neuromancer first came out
Yeah.
as the thing that what we know as cyberpunk today. I think Neuromancer was very much the progenitor of that.
Yeah. Now, interesting thing. Do you know who kind of coined the word cyberpunk? Did you
I
ever
don't
know that?
remember. I remember I looked it up, but I don't remember who it was. So please share.
Yeah. So apparently the word cyberpunk, because I thought it would kind of be something that was, that would have been a Gibsonian type of word that he created. But no, it's apparently there's this guy named Bruce Bethke. I'm bad. I'm just going to put a disclaimer out, and I'll probably put this disclaimer out multiple times. I'm bad with pronouncing some names. So Bruce Bethke, he apparently put together a short story named Cyberpunk, and that was the first kind of time that word had been created. And he kind of synthesized that word by using a bunch of different things in kind of like a soup until he finally said cyber and punk and was like, perfect. And he kind of published this back in 1980 about a like some teenage hackers, right? So
Mhm.
I don't even know if it itself represented, necessarily the cyberpunk genre it was, but it definitely like became associated with the works of like Gibson and everything like
Well,
that,
yeah,
which
the hacker subculture was a big part. Is a big part of the cyberpunk
yeah.
milieu, if you will, because it's very much a netrunners,
Hmm.
deckers, cyberpunk sort of thing. That's always the idea of information. Like information is a very big. The nature of information is a bbig trope in cyberpunk as well. So there being a hacker makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So they were just teenage hackers and everything like that. And so it was just kind of neat to find that he was writing about that in the 80s. And then of course when you get into some of those early authors and everything like that, I thought more for me was I was doing a little bit of reading, just kind of brushing up on some stuff for this talk about cyberpunk, was that it seemed like right in the 80s, like there's a bunch of people that I don't know if they were necessarily in the same circles and everything like that, but there was a lot of really cool ideas being formed about the same time, and then they all kind of had those themes. Now, of course, Brent, I think if I were to say, I've read some cyberpunk, I mean that would be on the lower end of some. I mean I read some things and I've read some Gibson, but the problem I have with Gibson is more that my brain just when I read Gibson, and Johnny Mnemonic I think is one of those stories that just kind of highlighted it for me, is that it just his transitions, like my brain needs something to kind of let me know or warn me that we're changing scenes or something like that. And I think maybe that's just a formatting thing. But I was reading Johnny Mnemonic just the other day, and I was like, I remember this now, because like one paragraph would end, and then there would just be another paragraph, and it would be something entirely different. But he had some cool stuff. He had he
I
had
think I
what
need to reread Johnny Mnemonic because I don't remember having that problem
it
at all.
it might be your
Um,
brain too. It might
I
just
was
be
kind of
my
surprised
defective brain.
I'm not saying your brain is defective. Stop that. I was kind of surprised to hear that as kind of what you said, because I think it's a pretty, like, as far as Cyberpunk, I feel like it's a pretty accessible.
Hmm.
I feel it's like a pretty accessible short story. Like Neuromancer, I feel is much more densely written. Like it's
Hmm.
much more literary of a book.
Yeah.
Like it's dense. Like I feel like Neuromancer, you probably have to read a few times to pick everything up.
Well,
Um,
that's fine. I mean, but but it was written at a time when you kind of had to make it dense, right? I mean, he's a guy who's writing. Like, I think I saw an interview that on that documentary you shared. I mean, didn't he have to type a book about computers and the cyber age on a typewriter? Like,
yeah. Like one of the things in that he said is, yeah, his knowledge, his lack of knowledge of computers is one of the things that sometimes made imagining the technology easy, or
mhm,
not easy, but it made some of his imaginings of technology kind of more forward thinking because he was kind of disconnected. So, but yeah,
mhm.
he did type Neuromancer on a typewriter, which is kind of funny when you think about it.
Yeah.
This movie about this book about far reaching computer technology, and he's clacking away on a typewriter keyboard.
Yeah. Well, and that's not bad. It's just interesting when you have kind of those almost predictive and prophetic things and stuff like that. And I think that if you're looking at literature and stuff like that, the one book I did read, and I actually started reading it a little bit just to remind myself lately, was I did read Snow Crash. Um, and I was kind of curious um if you had a thought on this, but I feel like the 80s were more when cyberpunk was kind of at its kind of, I don't know, like that's where a lot of the good stuff was happening. And I wonder if this analogy makes sense, because I don't remember where I saw this in my readings, but somebody basically said that Snow Crash is a cyberpunk novel, like Galaxy Quest is a Star Trek movie. So while
Yeah,
it was definitely a good movie, and it did Star Trek really well, kind of was its own thing. And I
right.
mean, I think that when you read Snow Crash, I mean, Snow Crash is very interesting, and I think it's really good, but it's almost cartoonish. Like,
It is. It's very cartoonish. It's very yeah, no, that is that is the quintessential difference between like Neuromancer is a very serious book, and and it sounds kind of pompous when I'm going to put it this way, and I don't mean it. Maybe I do mean it that way, I don't know. But like Neuromancer is a very serious book. Like you read Neuromancer, it's dense, it's put together, it's very literary, whereas Snow Crash is much more accessible. It's much more of an action movie
mhm,
versus like a drama. There's a lot happening. You can picture bright colors when you read Neuromancer, or when you read Snow Crash. Like you see a lot of bright colors, and you have your character, hero, protagonist. Like that name alone tells you what the book is going to be like. It's not going to be subtle.
no,
It's very much a it's very much a cartoony anime style
mhm,
book, which it's good. It was very entertaining. um but and again, maybe this is kind of snooty, but Neuromancer I feel is a better novel because it's much more literary, but Snow Crash is much more accessible, I feel.
yeah, it's a
um
tricky one. Like, I'm not gonna rate either of them, because honestly, I think I read Neuromancer like many years ago, but as I've discovered since we started this podcast, I can't remember shit. My brain is just like,
well
it filed that stuff away in the do not need, and then it just dropped them into the dustbin of history, because like,
well, and that's a thing though, is like Neuromancer, and that's what I say is Neuromancer is more dense. Like there's parts of Neuromancer that you can reread and you'll be like, oh man, that's amazing, I didn't remember that. Whereas like
mhm,
you remember stuff from Snow Crash because it's very punchy,
mhm,
it's very car crash, it's very high note all the time. Like
yeah,
you remember things like Hero being a mafia pizza delivery man, best swordsman and hacker in the world. You remember the character with the bomb in his sidecar and poor
Raven.
impulse poor impulse control tattooed on his head. Is that right?
Yep, yep, that's it. Because
I haven't
they didn't have prisons.
right. I
Yeah.
haven't read that book in like 10 years. And so there's things that you will remember about Snow Crash because that's written that way. It's written to
Mhm,
be very pulpy, very comic booky.
Yeah.
And so there's things that are going to stand out. Whereas Neuromancer has very much more, I hate to say it, but it just has much more serious concepts.
Yeah.
Like Snow Crash is written to be cool. Neuromancer is meant to make, there are parts of Neuromancer that are written to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah. And honestly, like because I picked up the audiobook for both of them just because that's my preferred method right now to kind of dive into that stuff. And even the person who's doing the narration for Snow Crash is a million times more enjoyable than the guy that they picked for Neuromancer. Like I was just like, I hate to really crap on anybody, but it doesn't feel like like how when you like start listening to a book and you're just like, oh my god, I could listen to this like this could put me to sleep. Like
Right.
that's what's happening. Like I just turn it on and it immediately turns into background noise, and I'm like, oh man, like
Another friend of mine, that's how he describes Blade Runner. He describes Blade Runner as the movie that he puts on to go to sleep to because of all the ambient music at the beginning.
oh well, that's
Uh,
fine.
so I get it. Like and Cyberpunk is so moody. Sometimes I could very much see different
Hmm.
genres being that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things we probably didn't do is we really didn't define cyberpunk. We kind of just jumped into cyberpunk because it's a topic we're both excited about. I'm excited about because of the style of cyberpunk, I think, more than the history about it. But like what is your favorite definition of cyberpunk, and like what does that mean to you?
I think the actual like dictionary definition of cyberpunk is pretty straight up.
Okay.
Science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. I think
Okay.
that's pretty straight up. If it has those tropes, it's
Hmm.
probably leaning pretty close to cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Um, with a strong strong leaning towards corporations being the thing that is controlling everybody. Um, lots of hacking is a big thing. There'll be a lot
Hmm.
of information. And really cyberpunk, I think one of the things that it tackles philosophically is kind of like what is being human. Like, are you a person or are you just data?
Hmm.
And what defines that sort of interaction. And I think that's a big part of cyberpunk too, in
Yeah.
the genre. So that's kind of what I feel. And cyberpunk to me is one of those things that's like, you'll know it if you see it. And if somebody says this is cyberpunk and it's not, you're going to know it if it's not. That's kind of how I feel about it.
I think that could be true. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think from an anime standpoint, I must admit, like trying to put myself in a person who's like being in Japan in the 1980s must have been an absolutely crazy time. Like because Japan was like the coolest place on the planet.
It's true.
um,
In the 80s, the United States did have a lot of fascination with other countries. There was
yeah.
the Australian thing that we had for a while, and then there's the Japanese thing, which is really still carried over. Like there's still a lot of focus on Japanese culture for Americans, which is kind of interesting that stuck
It
around.
it is.
So
I mean, I think that anime, manga, and everything kind of like permeating permeating like our literature and our movies and stuff kind of has helped it. But it's just funny because like Japan was like the craziest place ever. I don't know if you knew this, but like there's some just really random shit that happened. Like first of all, I think the country of Japan, like if you like look, I mean, most of the reason why Japan was so wealthy back then is um because it just the money it was actually in the land. Like so, for example, to give you an idea as to how expensive it was in Japan, if you wanted to like buy the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, it was worth more than California on a spreadsheet. Like just the
wow,
palace.
that's pretty interesting.
And it was like square footage in Tokyo was like 300 times as much as expensive as square footage in New York. Like if you wanted to buy a place in Tokyo, it was roughly $300 or 300 times as expensive per square foot than New York City. Like like that's just, I mean, it was insane, like absolutely bonkers insane. So it's kind of neat that they had all these things that happened with the cyberpunk movement because I can't imagine that everybody in Tokyo is experiencing the same kind of boom that they had.
Well,
And
yeah, and I think one of the things that influenced the like especially the cyberpunk kind of being focused on like that Japanese cultural influence is also because like that was when you really, I think, started to see historically, I think that was when Japan started to become like more allied towards the world powers too. Like they started to have a
Mhm.
lot of influence um
Well, and it
in the
seemed like a
80s.
lot of tech and stuff like that was
Exactly.
like
Yep.
they seemed to be really heavily invested in tech and all these kind of things. And it seemed like, I mean, technology, they were as good, if not better, than any other country at like really early adopting of tech. And that makes it kind of interesting because because when you watch, like when you look at some of that stuff, you obviously see like video game systems and stuff. So, yeah, I think there was
Well,
a lot of.
TVs and cars and
Mhm.
like a lot of that stuff. I think that, and that was the technology starting to become more and more important. That was definitely when
Yeah.
the movement towards Japan being kind of looked at in that way. I think that
Mhm.
was definitely when it kind of started. And so
Yeah.
that kind of worked its way into this fiction because kind of like in Firefly when they speak Chinese, it's
Mhm.
because like you can see that movement towards China being like much more influential than maybe it has been.
Mhm.
And I think that sort of same movement is what kind of influenced Cyberpunk to become so
Like tied to the
tied to it.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Ja-
Especially in the 80s, yeah.
yeah, especially 80s, yeah. And so, but there was also some really good stuff that was happening too, like just from a media standpoint. Now I think this is one of those this is Mike's hot take is that, first of all, I love the movie Akira. Like, and I think Akira has the perfect punk vibe to it, oppressive government, everything about that. I don't know if it's not the strongest candidate for Cyberpunk, and I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to be like this fucking moron. He obviously Akira is Cyberpunk, and I'm like, it, I didn't think of it as Cyberpunk until I saw it on a Cyberpunk list. I'll just say it like that.
I think
I
it
thought,
has. I think it definitely has many of the cyberpunk tropes. Like there's definitely the punk aesthetic.
mhm.
Um, Technology is a big oppressive thing in it.
Is it though?
It is because I mean, like technology is kind of what like makes Akira happen, isn't it? I haven't seen Akira in a long time.
Mm.
But like, isn't he in a, like? There's lab kids and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
that's like lab kids, but it's not like it's more like just science. It's like mad scientists. It's like saying Frankenstein in 2021 would be cyberpunk. He's just kind of like he's meddling with humanity a little bit, but not. And so I think that's where I'm kind of like, is it really cyberpunk? Because it's not. The technology isn't really the thing. It's really the ascendance of people, right? Like, I mean, Akira
But I
becomes
think,
this transcendent being, and then
right,
blows up like an
yeah,
atom bomb. So,
that's very true.
so
I don't know. I think it definitely, if it's not cyberpunk in itself, it definitely had a large impact on cyberpunk aesthetically.
Oh yeah, I mean like this like I saw somebody describe it as construction punk, and I was like, Jesus Christ. Because
I
when
don't.
you look at when you look at it, like the thing that's happening is that it's a sprawl. Like Neo Tokyo is built on the bones of Tokyo, but it instead of it being better for everyone, it's just bigger, and so that the cracks are deeper, but the
Right.
skyscrapers and stuff are bigger, right?
Right, and that's a very much a kind of a cyberpunk thing.
Hmm.
Is the sprawl and megatropolis and that stuff. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I can kind of see it. I get you definitely can make an argument that it's just a sci-fi, kind
Well.
of aping cyberpunk.
Mhm.
I could definitely see that, but I think it definitely has some of its roots. Well, not
Yeah.
roots. It definitely has some seeds in the cyberpunk genre.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was to like say, hey, you want to watch a cyberpunk anime, I mean, I would probably say watch Ghost in the Shell, or I might even go so far as to say like, one of the better examples. And I wonder, here's my curiosity. Have you ever heard of Cyber City Oedo?
No.
No. Yeah. So I mean, Cyber City Oedo is like something I watched a while ago because it was actually from like the 90s. And that is kind of a cyberpunky kind of thing, and it's done by a guy who went on to do Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. He also did like Wicked City, so he's got a fairly unique art style because the characters' faces are generally fairly angular in that. But it's very much like it. I think that's almost like a really good representation of cyberpunk in anime. And I would point somebody to that over Akira to get like the Cyberpunk. If you wanted like best
Ghost in
anime
the
ever,
Shell. Ghost in the Shell, definitely. I do agree that
yeah,
Akira is one of the best animes I've ever seen. I've actually never seen Ghost in the Shell in its entirety. I've only seen parts
oh
of it.
really?
Anime is not really my thing. That's my hot
Hmm.
take. Anime was never super my thing, like horror movies were. So
Yeah,
while you were buying anime movies, I was buying horror movies.
yeah, that's
But
fair.
uh, but yeah, no, Akira is super good. Ghost in the Shell, I've heard is a good representation from what I've seen.
Hmm.
It's a good representation of cyberpunk. So
Yeah, and of course the last couple ones are probably just, and I'm just curious if you've even heard about them, but one is called Bubblegum Crisis.
nope.
Yep. That one was late 80s, early 90s, and it is awesome. It's basically four girls that have power armor that fight against mega corporations that are making military weapons. It is amazing. Um, like, and of course the main like leader of this girl group is like runs a lingerie shop because obviously that's how the anime goes. But no, it's really quite good.
Cyberpunk always has those weird tropes. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
like 80s 80s music had such an impact on cyberpunk. Like Cyberpunk Red, the RPG, like rocker is still to this day one of the
Mhm.
classes in one
Well,
of the archetypes in the game. So
Well,
like
and I'm curious because like one of the things that made Bubblegum Crisis so good for me was that it really again leaned into music and really tapped that music of the 80s. And so there's good music in this anime, like in my opinion really good music. So the fact that it's probably not as well known is sad to me, but it's kind of its own little niche thing. Girls in
right.
power armor saving the day against malicious corporations. I mean, I think that should get a lot more people watching it, but whatever.
Well, if I get the hankering to watch some anime, I will pick it up.
Yeah. And then of course, I think there's a few more anime obviously that are out there that could be interesting to talk about, but I'm not gonna throw out too many anime. So I think when you get to cyberpunk, it's really the strongest punk genre of like I think it's the strongest defined punk genre, even though it's kind of like ill-defined. And I had to laugh because I was talking with a mutual friend, and I was just like, "So, what do you think about these?" And he because we had seen that list, and one of the things on that list was the movie Equilibrium, right? And and I was just like, I must be misremembering Equilibrium because like I don't think Equilibrium is cyberpunk at all. Did you ever watch that one with what's your name?
Yeah, no, I actually really enjoy Equilibrium. I would not call it a cyberpunk movie.
So yeah, but it was on
Uh,
that 50 best cyberpunk movies of all time list.
okay,
Random.
that list was bullshit. That list had more bullshit on it than anything I've ever seen. Like there was so much padding on that list. Equilibrium, like I mean, it had like why they put it on there is it had the trope of the dystopian society controlling people.
Exactly.
Like that's why they put it on the list. And while, like I said, that is a cyberpunk thing, that's not the entirety of cyberpunk. Like there was no
Hmm.
technology in it. There was an underground group, but they really didn't fit the like punk aesthetic at all.
Hmm.
So I would not call that a cyberpunk movie. It's a good science fiction movie, and a good dystopian movie, but I would not call it a cyberpunk
Yeah, and I think
movie.
that's where I start to get that bringing it back to my earlier conversation about like proper definition of like what it is. And I think, and I actually read kind of an article or something like that, which basically kind of harangues cyberpunk as a genre because they're just like, this is just people trying to make up a new genre and it's not really well defined and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I'm kind of getting that vibe now that I'm seeing people just kind of staple cyberpunk onto their favorites.
I mean, punk as a punk. Okay, so first off, people are attaching punk to stuff to make it viable.
Cool, to make it cool.
Cyberpunk has a definition. Like it has
Mhm.
a definition. Those three things are what make a cyberpunk book or movie or whatever. Without those three things, I would say it's probably not cyberpunk. It probably reaches into some sort of other like
Yeah.
science fiction subgenre, whether it's dystopian or whatever. I don't know that many other subgenres of science fiction, but like steampunk. We've talked about steampunk a little bit off podcast, but like steampunk doesn't have hard like even the punk thing doesn't really make much sense in the definition of steampunk, and it seems like mostly it got added just for marketing purposes, because I mean, like I
Mhm.
said, that's proto-Victorian. It's Victorian England with steam powered engines that they didn't have.
Well, and the funny thing is though, at least with that, I kind of can see how you could have steampunk stories, right? You could have steam tech low life, right? To kind of use the Sterling, instead of high tech low life, you could say steam tech low life, right? And kind of just take steam to its, you
But
know.
that's not actually a trope of the literature. Like that's not like, I don't know if you've read many steampunk stories, but like
Oh no, I'm.
that's not something that actually happens in the literature. Like
Hmm?
most of the steampunk stories that I've read, it isn't I mean, it is low life in the sense that like it's Victorian England and
Hmm.
there's plague victims and
Oh no, sorry.
like
I was trying to say I could see how that could be applied like steam tech low life. I'm not saying that is what they actually did. I'm just saying I could
oh
envision it.
yeah, but yeah, I guess I could kind of see it too in that sense, but like that's not what happened. Like, just did you ever hear about the game Dishonored?
Yeah,
Ever heard
yeah,
of that?
that was well, again, another first person. So
Well, but
I
that's considered a fairly steampunky game. Well, kind
is
of
it
magic,
steampunk? I was
kind
about
of,
to say
yeah.
I thought it had like
Um,
magic and shit in
it
it.
does
So
have magic in it, but steampunk sometimes does too.
yeah.
But it had like a lot of steam engines and stuff like that, and it fits kind of the steampunk aesthetic of pocket watches and top hats and all that stuff. But
Hmm.
and like that seems like there's a lot more deviation in what's in the steampunk genre, because it's not like it was made up for marketing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say made up, but like when Cyberpunk became popular, people started making these other stories about steam
Hmm.
powered Victorian London, and they were like, how do we sell books about this?
Mm.
And I think that's kind of how steampunk got put on there. Sort of like we talked about diesel punk. Like I have never in the life of me heard Mad Max referred to as a diesel punk like in that one list.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much just a straight post-apocalyptic science fiction story. Um, so I don't understand how, like I guess it could I guess diesel punk is a thing.
Hmm.
But I don't understand how diesel punk is a thing, because again, there's no society to rebel against in like Mad Max. Like there's no overbearing government, which has always been a big part of the punk movement.
Well, yeah, and like that's the thing about Mad Max and some of these other ones, and it's just like because it again, that's marketing. Because obviously, if you say cyberpunk, like if and you had a sci-fi thing, people may question, and I don't think this is the best way to do things, but people may question, obviously, um, whether or not after they've read it, your book would be considered part of the genre or anything like that, even loosely so. But at least people are willing to look at it. Whereas if you try to, market it just like another sci-fi novel or something like that, I think, you may not get that same edginess and
And
coolness and stuff.
people like to classify things. So, when you
Yeah.
come down to it, it's like, well, where can we put this? Like, it's not just a cyberpunk story, but how can we, where do we put this in the, bookstore sort of thing? So
Did you
yeah,
did you ever so speaking of steampunk and just kind of as a weird thing, did you ever read The Difference Engine? Because that's a William Gibson, Bruce Sterling thing, isn't it?
French Engine. I did not read it.
Yeah, I mean, I have not read it myself. Obviously, I came across it as I was doing some of this research, and I would be curious to see how it was because I mean, Gibson and Sterling, like, that's two two decent authors, right? I mean,
Uh, well, Gibson doesn't really write cyberpunk anymore. Like a couple of his stuff have been ghost stories that I've read, which I didn't find as interesting as his cyberpunk stuff.
yeah.
Um, but oh man, don't read about the difference engine. It's going to confuse you even more.
Oh, never mind then. Fuck that.
So about the book. In 1855, the Industrial Revolution is in full inexorable whatever. Swing, powered by steam-driven cybernetic engines.
Mm.
But no, it's not really a cyberpunk book.
No, I said it's steampunk.
Yeah, it probably yes, it does seem much more steampunk, which means
Yeah.
that he himself has bridged the Venn diagram a little. Um,
Well,
so take
did you
that for what
ever?
you will.
I didn't.
I most of what I've read of Gibson is I've read most of his. I read the I can't remember what it's called, but the Cyberpunk, the Neuromancer trilogy,
Mhm.
all three Neuromancer books, and then collections of his short stories. Like Burning Chrome is maybe one of my favorite books ever.
Yeah.
Because it's got Johnny Mnemonic in it, Dogfight, New Rose Hotel, and all of those
Kind of
stories
the.
are great.
No, I think Burning Chrome is supposed to be. It's supposed to be good because Burning Chrome isn't it a story as well as the name of the book, or is that just
Yeah,
my
Burning
memory?
Chrome is a story. Yeah, Burning Chrome is a story in the book. It's about two hackers going against a third hacker named Chrome, and that's what Burning Chrome is tonight's the night that
Oh,
we decide to burn Chrome.
interesting. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
I actually haven't read that one. I just thought I think I knew that it was in the book. Um,
Dogfight is one of my favorite ones. That's the one about the video game where it's a pilot sim,
hmm,
and this guy thinks he's going to become famous by being the best at this pilot sim game. Um, and so he goes to this local club and plays and plays and plays and plays. And there's this guy there who was a war vet who piloted drones just like the game. And so he's the best at it because, it's real for him.
yeah,
And he's like in a wheelchair and stuff like that. And the main character in the book, like steals these concentration drugs from his girlfriend that she's been using to study. So he ruins her life, and then he beats this guy and ruins this poor guy in a wheelchair's life. And he thinks like, oh, I've done it. I'm the best. And like everybody just kind of hates him because he like took it away from this guy that it was all he had.
yeah.
Which is kind of just a neat kind of moral play. And I feel like those moral plays happen a lot in Cyberpunk, where it's like you have this ability should this be what we're doing.
Mm.
I think that's another trope that Cyberpunk, there's a lot of philosophy I feel in Cyberpunk that the other punk genres maybe don't have as much.
Maybe like I said, I can't say that I'm real deep on that, but I do appreciate like because most of my stuff has come from anime and manga, and so
That's my hot take that'll probably get me some hate from all of our steampunk fans.
that steam. Well, I mean, I don't hate steampunk. I just think that the term punk is weird.
It is weird, and it's used, like I said, excuse me,
It's very strange.
it's used very liberally to try
Market.
to add classification and market.
Yeah.
Um,
And
like I said, Primal Punk. Like when you brought Primal Punk up, I laughed because it's not really even a thing. Like Primal
yeah,
Punk is just what they called their book for some reason. And it might even be a bad translation because Six More Vodka is a Swedish company. So,
German, aren't
no, I think they're Swedish.
they? Oh, okay. Yeah. So then the other thing is, I was kind of curious because Cyberpunk itself, kind of lives in lives in its day, and I think that, and I don't think that Cyberpunk is relegated to retro futurism like some people seem like. I think that there's some camps that basically say Cyberpunk has only really be viewed through that retro futuristic 80s lens, like the world of tomorrow is always how they would have viewed it in the 80s. And I think Cyberpunk could evolve, but as I was researching, I actually found that there's a genre um, that has come up after Cyberpunk called post Cyberpunk. Did you, I guess, have you heard or seen or anything like that?
A little bit. One correction, you were right. It is a German company. Six More Vodka is in Germany. So you were correct. I was wrong. Congratulations.
Uh,
Um,
I I'm not. I wasn't saying anything. I was
no,
just
you're
saying I
fine.
thought it was German.
I'm kidding, but I just want to be factually correct.
That's
I have post cyberpunk a little bit. I haven't heard it called that. Like a lot of what I've heard is the transhumanist movement.
mhm.
which is typified by a lot of similar things as Cyberpunk, but is like the decision about whether or not human beings are just data has kind of been made. Um, and the idea isn't that, the idea now isn't that we control data, that we are data, is kind of where I feel like the transhumanist ideal goes, where instead of modifying your body, you just get a new one, sort of thing.
Well, so post Cyberpunk, this is kind of interesting to me because I actually didn't know about this until this last week. I went to a website called tvrtropes.org, which is actually a fun website to read. I don't know if you've ever been in there, but whoever's doing stuff on there is pretty cool. But post Cyberpunk, according to them on this wiki article, trope article, I don't know, whatever it is post Cyberpunk picks up where Cyberpunk left off, whereas Cyberpunk is or was a darker and edgier riposte from older science fiction intended to portray what might have happened if we don't all destroy ourselves. Post Cyberpunk is intended to present a less pessimistic, more idealistic version. So whereas Cyberpunk is anti-corporate, anti-government, post-Cyberpunk is willing to give both parties redeeming features. Whereas Cyberpunk portrays the future as a crap sack world, post-Cyberpunk posits society will probably be about the same, just with cooler gadgets and crap saccharin world aspects. I really don't know where that came from, but that's kind of a funny word. Where Cyberpunk is futuristic, forward-thinking on the cutting edge, so is post-Cyberpunk. So the little blurb they have is it's high-tech high life rather than high-tech low life. So have you ever heard of that definition
I
before?
have not, and I sort of don't believe in that unless we can find like published authors.
Well, I will go ahead and tell you that I went I typed in post cyberpunk books and I got Neuromancer as a post cyberpunk book. So
Yeah, so
fuck the
that's not.
internet.
Yeah, let's see. Best post cyberpunk books. Let's see here.
Obviously, Neuromancer.
Nexus, River of the Gods, Wake, Feed. Have I read any of these? Idoru's on there, so that's not a post cyberpunk book. That is
Yeah,
a
like that's. I mean, I, Idoru is or whatever is definitely.
Vert. Vert is listed as a post cyberpunk book
Which
on
I
this
thought it was.
list, which I think it's pretty much straight up cyberpunk, and I don't think it's very positive. If I
Yeah.
remember our assessment of it, it seemed pretty grim.
Well, I mean, people using drugs, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like when I look at it and I'm seeing these things, this is why I love the genre itself because it's so confusing. Like, oh yeah, because this Book Riot website basically says these are some books that you need to add to your,
And it
you
seems
know,
like post cyberpunk, this definition of post cyberpunk that they use to make this list that I'm seeing, like the most recent book was 2016, but the rest are most in the 90s, 96 and
yeah.
2006. So it might be like this might have been like a blurb that got passed over. I'm pretty sure we're pretty firmly into the transhumanist ideal now,
Oh, we
where
probably are. I just thought it was interesting
that is
I
interesting.
think,
I hadn't heard of that.
yeah, you should look it up because I think Gibson himself was in the post cyberpunk stuff, and I
Well,
think
Idoru is a Gibson book.
but was it cyberpunk or post cyber? No, just kidding.
It's a cyberpunk book. I mean, it's in his
Sprawl? Or no, not
last.
Sprawl.
It's not in the Sprawl trilogy. Um, Aduru is the second book in William Gibson's Bridge trilogy. The others are Virtual Light and Tomorrow's Parties, which I've read
Mhm.
Virtual Light, and it is not very bright. Gibson's fans will feel at home in the postmodern dystopia and cyberpunkish future. Yeah, it's pretty much a. It sounds like This seemed like marketing a little bit to me too. It's like, oh
Yeah.
no, cyberpunk's dead. This is post cyberpunk.
Well,
Um,
and so there's a guy or gal or there's somebody who writes on a board or a website called Neon Dystopia, and I thought he did a pretty good job going into like what is post cyberpunk. And I think it kind of happened. I thought I saw in there that it was like 2007 or something along those lines. Was when about um, it came in there, and he mentioned that Diamond Age or whatever the hell that book is called.
yeah, Diamond Age, which is Neil Stevenson.
Yeah, Diamond Age or a Young Lady's Illustrated Primer is an example of a post cyberpunk.
Well, and
Uh,
Neil Stevenson. I mean, like Snow Crash is much more positive. I would say Snow Crash is post Cyberpunk.
Maybe.
Then because it's much more hopeful than
Ooh, see, look at that. We've
Neuromancer.
already confused the cyberpunk word, and we
Well,
haven't
I
even.
don't. I told you I don't. I told you I don't really believe that. I didn't know post cyberpunk was a definition, but I
Yeah,
told you I kind of said at the beginning that I don't believe it's the same. Like I don't think Snow Crash is as cyberpunk as say Neuromancer.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah, I find these splitting hairs and all that kind of stuff to be more fascinating than anything. Because if anybody wants to be like, Mike, you're wrong. Obviously, Snow Crash is post cyberpunk. I'd be like, okay, sure.
well,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, I consider, like I said, I don't believe in solid labels. I think more in Venn diagrams. So,
hmm.
like, I feel like the circles just overlap quite a bit. But like post cyberpunk being more hopeful, like that seems weird to me because that doesn't like I don't know. That's interesting because that doesn't seem to be where most science fiction literature is going.
Well, no. Well, I mean, it's I don't know. Maybe I guess I haven't read any of the newest stuff. Like, I mean, what was the newest sci-fi book that I read? Oh, Jesus, I don't know. I can't. It doesn't come to me off the top of my head. But I'll have to kind of take a look and see what the newest hard sci-fi is talking about.
The
Because
newest one I started reading, which I didn't finish, was the guy that wrote John Dies at the End wrote second. He wrote a book called David.
David dies at the end. No,
Well, David Wong was
the author.
the that was his pen name,
Oh,
and I can't find it. But he wrote a book called like Black Suits and Fancy Hats or something like that,
hmm.
and it's almost a straight up cyberpunk book.
Oh, okay. And why did you stop? I mean, if you don't mind me asking, why did you stop reading it? Just time or just interest or
It was very silly.
very
Um,
silly?
yeah, it was more like it was more like a Snow Crash. Yeah, it's called Futuristic Violence and Fancy Suits is what it's called.
Okay.
And it's labeled as this book takes place as 20 minutes into the future. Um, Features a young woman named Zoe Ash, whose millionaire playboy father just passed away. Now Zoe, who's lived in a trailer park and nothing to do with her father, is on the run from all sorts of superpowered thugs who want to kidnap her because she's apparently the key to her father's vault.
Hmm.
But it's set in a very cyberpunk like kind of futuristic kind of thing.
Okay.
And it was very well, yeah, I would describe it as a lot like Snow Crash. Like it had that kind of same devil may care literary style, and at the time
Mm.
I just wasn't up for reading a cartoon.
Mm. Okay.
Um, and so I didn't finish it. I've been meaning to. It's on my reading list. It's on a stack right over there. I can look at it. Um, but
So are so many books for me, unfortunately, Brent.
well, yeah, me too. Um, I love David Wong's work. That's not his actual name, and he's going by his real name now. But I love his work. But that was not one that was easy for me.
It just wasn't the right time, I guess.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, we all have those moments. I mean, I think what is that? And I try if I pick up a book, I really try my damnedest to like finish it just so I can complete the thought because sometimes books don't have the greatest start. And I feel like that sucks because usually you want to capture the reader right away and then of course they can't put the book down, that page turn all the way to the end. But like I think the only book that I notably forced myself to put down was Obsidian Butterfly. And boy, gosh, that book was just
City and
hard for me to read.
Butterfly. That was
That I think what is it?
Laura K. Hamilton.
I think it's Laurel K. Hamilton. Is that?
Whatever. Those books are terrible.
Yeah. So I mean, it just wasn't really my style, and it just was so far out of what I usually
They
like to
shouldn't be.
read.
They shouldn't be anybody's style. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it right now. Lord King Hamilton, terrible books.
Sorry, Laurel. I apologize. We're not here. We're not gatekeepers or here to crap on anybody's work, but it wasn't liked at all.
I do not feel they were particularly well written vampire novels.
But there's a certain like trash, like there's a certain appeal of trashy kind of books too. So don't get me wrong. I'm not gonna like go, oh, you read trashy books. Like that's not a thing. And I
I'm
don't
not
know how
saying
we
you
got
can't.
onto this subject, but we're gonna go
I'm
ahead
not
and.
saying you can't like Laurel K. Hamilton. I'm saying I don't like Laurel K. Hamilton. More props to you if you enjoy her books. That's fine. I know a lot of people do, and she's a famous writer, and I'm not. So hey, take that how you will. But
Well, give us time, Brent. Give us
I did
time.
not. I did not enjoy the books of hers that I read.
That's fair. Oh, you read more than one.
Indeed.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe you know what, you have a better formed opinion because obviously I got through the one and I no, I didn't even get through the one. I got halfway through the one and I was like, okay, moving on.
I
Although
think I read the first and second one, I think, and I was like, nah, I'm good.
there's like, there's like a lot of books in that series.
I
But
think she's still writing them. So yeah,
oh,
there
geez.
is.
So needless to say, we're gonna get back to Cyberpunk here. And so I think Cyberpunk is a great it's a great concept, and for me, I like it because of the style. And I think that I don't remember where I heard it, but I think there was definitely a style over substance mentality over Cyberpunk in some ways, and I like that concept about it because it is it's very fun, it's very neon, it's very synth, it's very maybe that puts me squarely in that 80s version of Cyberpunk, but I like Cyberpunk. It's good
I think it
stuff.
definitely puts you in the Neil Stevenson side of
Mhm.
cyberpunk.
It does. And I don't necessarily need it to be all grit and a horrifying future of technology and butting my head against it, but whatever.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like, well, so this is just Cyberpunk, and obviously this is a very free form conversation about it. But Brent, do you have any final thoughts about Cyberpunk before we wrap up here?
Read Neuromancer. That's what I would say to everybody.
Read Neuromancer.
Read Neuromancer. Read the Sprawl trilogy. Sure, read Snow Crash. It's pretty fun.
Okay.
Don't watch Johnny Mnemonic the movie if you expect it to be Johnny Mnemonic the short story.
That's fair. Yeah,
Um,
because there were definitely some differences, but
it's an entertaining movie. Don't get me wrong. And the part where he says how much he hates Newark is absolutely one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen in my life, and I still laugh about it to this day every time I watch that scene. But it is definitely not anything like the book, or the
yeah.
short story. So
Okay. So well then, so I guess with that, next week I kind of wanted to talk about cyberpunk games. And I think that there's obviously some good definitions of cyberpunk games because, and we didn't even talk about Edge Runners, as an anime because obviously Edge Runners was fucking amazing. Like,
yeah, it was, and we can talk about Edge Runners at the beginning of next week. That'll lead us into the. One of us should probably talk about Cyberpunk Red. So
okay, I haven't actually played Cyberpunk Red, so I'll let you jump into that.
sounds delightful.
So I think I'm gonna go. I think I might go a little off-brand again. And I've been looking at tabletop cyberpunk games, and one of them that I ran into was called Android or something like that. It's by Fantasy Flight Games. Have you heard of this one? It's in the
Mm-mm.
Genesis system. No, none of these are ringing bells or anything like that.
No, well, Fantasy Flight does because they made everything for a while, but no, it doesn't ring any bells as far as the game.
Yeah, I think it's called Android Shadows of the Beanstalk, and so I'll probably take a look at that and see how that goes. Probably give my 2 cents. Maybe
I
focusing
will
more.
probably talk a little bit about. I can talk about Cyberpunk Red, and I'll probably talk a little bit about Morkborg if I get or Cyborg if I get
Mhm.
book by next time.
Okay, so basically that's setting us up to do book reports on up to 3 games next week. So
Book
like
reports, yeah.
Oh gosh. So, well, I guess we better get reading. And so I guess with that, we appreciate everybody listening. And we hope that if you like what you hear, you can always email us at rollwiseguys@gmail.com. And you can reach us on Twitter if Twitter still exists.
There's some more cyberpunk dystopia for you. Big corporations owning Twitter. But anyways, we're also now on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel that will also be in the links. You can listen to us there. Like, subscribe, everything, all of the things that you do on various social media platforms. And we do, as always, appreciate everyone who listens. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And so let us know how we're doing. Let us know why you'll never listen to us again, or maybe why you will listen to us again, so we can hopefully be there for you. But with that, Brent, do you want to scene us out?
As always, I hope you all roll well and roll wise. And scene.